Welcome everyone to Dogfights, a series in which we put two aircraft from War Thunder up against each other to see which one is the best. Now today, we've got the Ki-43, which is a Japanese aircraft, and from the British Air Force, both from lower ranks by the way, we've got the Hawker Hurricane Mark 1. Okay, so before we put these two aircraft up against each other and see which one would kick the other one's ass, let's do a brief history of both the aircraft so you can get a good idea of where they came from and why they came into play. So, pre-World War II, there was an aircraft called the Ki-43, which entered service in 1936, and the Japanese Air Force immediately noticed the potential for this aircraft because it was very manoeuvrable, which made it a very good dogfighter. So, the company, Nakajima, who made the Ki-43, was asked by the Air Force if they could make a new fighter that was just as manoeuvrable as the Ki-43, but one which reached speeds of 500 kilometers an hour. So Nakajima took on the challenge, and in 1942 the Ki-43 came about, which is the aircraft you're seeing on screen now. Now the Ki-43 was just as manoeuvrable as the Ki-43, however it could reach very high speed, which exceeded 500 kilometers an hour, which was exactly what the Japanese Air Force were looking for. Now the way that Nakajima did this was they sacrificed things like the armoured cockpits and self-sealing fuel tanks and stuff like that. And what this does is it made the aircraft a lot lighter, allowing them to keep that manoeuvrability that the Ki-43 had, but then exceed the speeds that the Ki-43 could achieve. So they essentially made a very damn good fighter. Now there are many variants of this during the war, one of which was called the Ki-43 III-B. Now the reason I mention this one specifically is because it carried 20mm cannons. Now in War Thunder at the moment there is no Ki-43 variant that has 20mm cannons, so it'd be nice in the future if War Thunder was to implement this aircraft. I think it wouldn't make too much of a change to the game, but it'd be nice because it would add an extra aircraft to the Japanese Air Force. There's quite a few at the moment, but there's nowhere near as many compared to the other air forces, so that would be nice if they implemented that. But that's a brief history of the Ki-43 and why it came into play. Alright, now on to the Hawker Hurricane Mark 1. Now the Hurricane Mark 1 was implemented not for any reason in particular actually, it's just, you know, aircraft companies make aircraft and then if the Air Force want them they buy them. And they made the Hurricane, which the Air Force was very interested in. Now the design itself was actually based on the Hawker Fury. If you don't know what Hawker Fury is, in the early stages of the British Air Force, if you play in War Thunder, there's these aircraft called the Hawker Furies, or just Furies. They're reserve aircraft, so if you played in them then that is basically what the Hurricane is based off of. Now the reason they based it off a biplane is because they wanted to make it a monoplane version of that. Now a monoplane, if you didn't already know, is a single winged aircraft, and biplane obviously two-wing aircraft. Now what they wanted to do was make it very heavily armoured. Now obviously the rounds that the Hurricane fires, the 7.7mm machine guns, the 7.7mm bullets themselves, they're not that powerful, but what they did with the Hurricane was they implemented 8 Browning machine guns onto it, which just makes it really, really powerful, because obviously 8 machine guns hitting the aircraft at once will cause quite a bit of damage over time. Now during the Battle of Britain, just to give you an idea of the scale of the amount of Hurricanes there were during World War II, during the Battle of Britain there were 32 Hurricane squadrons, and if you compare that to the Spitfires, which were well known during the Battle of Britain, there were only 19 Spitfire squadrons, so the Hurricanes were used a lot during the World War II. Now the thing about the Hurricane was it had very high damage compared to the Spitfire, but the Spitfire was a lot faster and a lot more agile. So what tended to happen during World War II was Hurricanes would take on bombers while the Spitfires would take on all the fighters, and this tended to work out quite well because the Hurricane actually had quite a high damage tolerance as well, so all those guns firing at it from the bombers, the Hurricane could take a lot of damage from that, whereas the Spitfire would have gone down quite easily if it was to take on the job that the Hurricane took on. So there you go, brief history of the Hurricane, hope you enjoyed. Okay, so we've done the history, let's do the comparison. Now obviously here we're comparing two fighters to each other, but if I was to be comparing two bombers or attackers, I would compare them on different things. So for the fighters, I compare them on 5 different standpoints, and that's their weapons, their top speed, their turn time, their rate of climb, and their 1 second burst mass. So let's do this. So on the Ki-43, it's got two 12.7mm Ho-103 machine guns with 500 rounds of ammunition, whereas on the Hurricane Mark 1, it's got 8 7.7mm Browning machine guns with 2,800 rounds of ammunition. Now, although the Ki-43 has got bigger rounds being fired, it also has less. It's got a quarter of the machine guns that the Hurricane Mark 1 has, and also it's got a sixth of the ammunition, or almost a sixth of the ammunition. So I feel that the Hurricane definitely wins in this situation. It's kind of supported if you play in-game. If you play well and you're quite accurate with all of your kills, and you actually go for like quite easy, well, not easy to kill targets. If you go for other fighters, essentially, what you'll find is you'll be able to kill about 5 to 6 enemies, like I said, as long as you're accurate and you go for other fighters, and then you'll run out of ammunition. Whereas with the Ki-43, I always find that although I'm taking out 2 to 3 targets per round, per set of ammunition, I tend to run out, and it can get quite annoying. So I feel that the Hurricane Mark 1, even though it's carrying less powerful rounds, the fact that it's got more machine guns and it's got more ammunition, I feel that it wins in that standpoint. So that's definitely a point for the Hurricane. In terms of top speed, the Ki-43 has a top speed of 530 kilometers an hour, whereas the Hurricane Mark 1 has a top speed of 467 kilometers an hour. So therefore the Ki-43 definitely wins in that situation. It's got 63 kilometers an hour advantage over the Hurricane Mark 1, which means it can outrun the Hurricane Mark 1 and it can catch up with the Hurricane Mark 1 if it wants to kill it. Now in terms of turn time, the Ki-43 turns in 7 seconds, whereas the Hurricane Mark 1 turns in 9 seconds. Now if you're wondering why that's different to the statistic in-game, that's because the stat in-game is actually talking about rudder control turn time. So if you was to hold the Q key or the E key on the keyboard and just do a full circle turn, that's what that's talking about. Whereas what I'm talking about is rolling the plane on its side and turning that way, which is the most commonly used turn anyway. The rudder kind of assists that, but it's mainly to do with the flaps pulling up on the aircraft and the elevator at the back. So that's what I'm talking about with my stat. So yeah, anyway, the Ki-43 wins then because it's got 2 seconds advantage over the Hurricane Mark 1 in terms of its ability to turn. Now in terms of rate of climb, the Ki-43 climbs at a rate of 22 meters per second, whereas the Hurricane Mark 1 climbs at a rate of 17 meters a second. So again, the Ki-43 wins in terms of its rate of climb. Now in terms of 1 second burst mass, if you don't know what 1 second burst mass is, essentially the mass increase on an enemy aircraft if you was to shoot at it for 1 whole second with your rounds with 100% accuracy. That is the mass that is added on to the enemy aircraft. So on the Ki-43 there's a mass of 0.99 kilograms per second added, whereas on the Hurricane Mark 1 there's a mass of 1.32 kilograms per second added. So the Hurricane wins on that standpoint. Alright, so overall the Ki-43 wins 3 points to 2 on the Hurricane. Now let me just summarise my thoughts on these two aircraft. So the Ki-43, it's way more manoeuvrable than the Hurricane Mark 1 is. I'm not saying the Hurricane is not manoeuvrable at all, it is pretty damn manoeuvrable, but the Ki-43 is so manoeuvrable. Most of the Japanese aircraft just perform in that way. They're just really quick at turning, and that's just it. However, that does come with a big disadvantage. Generally, with the Ki-43, if you're getting shot at, you're probably going to go down because it's a very weak aircraft. It can't take much damage before it goes down, whereas the Hurricane Mark 1 is an absolute tank. It can take quite a few hits before going down, and even the size of the hits it can take are quite big. As you can see on the screen now, I've got a big hole in my flap and also a hole in the side of my wing too, and because of that I should be going, like, you know, losing control of my aircraft, but it still performs pretty well even with that much damage sustained, and I do sustain more in a minute, and you know, it's still flying quite well. So the Hurricane's definitely better at sustaining damage than the Ki-43. So if you was to pick one of these aircraft in a battle, in my opinion, I'd probably pick the Ki-43 because I like to maneuver around aircraft and stuff and outmaneuver my opponents. However, if you want to do some bombing control, or you just want to sort of you don't really mind so much about not being able to maneuver or catch up with most aircraft, then use the Hurricane. It can cause a lot of damage to enemy aircraft. It might not sound it with the 7.7mm machine guns, but the fact that it's got 8 of them and the it's got quite a high rate of fire. It's not amazing, but it's high enough that you can really deal some damage to enemy aircraft as long as you're accurate. So yeah, if you're looking to kill a lot of people without running out of ammo, then the Hurricane is definitely for you, especially if you you know, you want to be able to take a lot of excuse me, especially if you want to take a lot of damage without going down. So Ki-43 if you want to dogfight and be maneuverable, Hurricane Mark 1 if you want to kill a lot of targets, take a lot of damage, and you don't really care too much about you know, maneuverability and speed. So yeah, in my opinion the Ki-43 wins, but that's just my opinion on both of the aircraft if you want to use either one of them, like the advantages and disadvantages. So there you go. So that was it. Comment in the if you want to comment on the video and say which one you think wins. That's great. I'll, you know, if anyone does actually comment, then next week in the next dogfight video, if you want to see that, obviously, I will say who which aircraft won in terms of the comments. That's obviously, like I said, if any of you actually comment. So anyway, thanks for watching. I will say one thing, this is obviously a new series. I've never done this on my channel before. I just got an idea of it for it about a week and a half ago, and I've just been putting it together since then, over the past couple of days and stuff. So obviously because of that, everything in the video is subject to change. So definitely if you if you have the ability to comment, if you've got any thoughts on anything to do with the video, if it's like intro music, because my friend did say he wasn't a fan of the intro music, if it's the style of the video, even if it's the way I've arranged things in the video, just comment on that and tell me if you don't want it or you do want it. That would be really, really appreciated, and thank you if you do actually do that. So anyway, like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. I've been Mustafa, over and out.